This time, I would like to call the special board meeting to order. Clerk of the board, please call roll.
Arancibia,
Present.
Hall, Segura,
Here.
Solis,
Present.
Tarantino,
Here.
Aguirre.
Present.
We will now hold a moment of silence in the Pledge of Allegiance led by our superintendent, Dr. Aguirre. Yes, yes.
Place your right hand over your heart. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God.
indivisible, the rich for all. Oh my God. That was a little loud.
Thank you, Dr. Aguirre.
Thank you.
Per Government Code Section 54954.3, this is the point of the agenda where members of the public may address the board on the item that has been described in the notice for the special meeting. Before or during consideration of that item, speakers shall be limited to 3 minutes each. Thank you for your cooperation.
We have one speaker, Anthony Garcia.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your invitation and my administrator here, Mr. Craychall here, and speaking on behalf of the community of Granger Junior High and the bigger community of National City. I've been a member of that community for a long time. I was a graduate of National City Middle and also Sweetwater High School, class of '85. And my wife was a Granger grad. Her mother was a Granger grad in the 1950s. So we come from a long line of National City people who just continue to be there and enjoy our community. So we thank you so much. Just a little bit about, our circumstance there at Granger. We are obviously we're an older school with a lot of needs, and I go through just the thought of my process. I'll start with the band, where they have no facilities to play anywhere. We tend to juggle around and try to figure out where to have activities. And if we do that, it has to be in kind of a parade kind of environment where we cannot do that, have those activities. And band is a great thing, and we have the only band in National City, the only junior high band. So I know that Mr. McCarty would be very, very happy if we ever have a building like that. I don't know if you've ever come into our ASB office and our bathrooms are very old, and obviously the kids have to also go through some heavy-duty things they've been there for a long time. And I know that Mr. Craychall taught there 31 years ago, and there's some benches that were there. I'll tell you a story. When we had the pandemic, we had invited some community members that were members of of Granger, and one of them is Michael Pitts. And I don't know if you know Michael Pitts. He was an All-American basketball player at Sweetwater High School and who also attended Granger Junior High. He was the first 7-footer, ended up going and playing for the Seattle Supersonics. I found him, and I asked him, can you do a motivational thing for us? And he says, yeah. And he said, hey, are those benches still there? Because I carved my name on one. I go, they're still there. So every year we do I Love a Clean Granger. We sand them, we paint them, we sand them, we paint them. They're about that thick in paint, and we continue to do that. So there's also a place there, and I know that it's a difficult thing. I know there's a walkway on the side at the ends of the buildings on the east side where it's just gravel. But that is actually a flooding plain where if flooding comes out, it's supposed to drain, and kids walk sideways. You have to walk sideways. It's just not a place to do that. So we definitely want to appreciate that money and just getting our community in order. And I think, obviously, the responsibility for me as a member of the community is to make sure that I do the best thing I can do for my students and to give everything I can for my students. And understand your responsibility is also great, and we thank you for that. And we look forward to the appreciation of you guys doing that for us. So I know I have 4 seconds, so I want to just thank you for everything, and I appreciate your help and to work together and to make our city, our community of Granger, and also our community of National City a better place for our kids to learn. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
No further speakers.
All right, since there's no further speakers, we'll conduct a first reading of resolution number 4801, authorizing the issuance and negotiated sale of not to exceed 58 million of current interest bonds and capital appreciation bonds of Proposition O, not to exceed 200 million of current interest bonds of Measure DD of Sweetwater Union High School District, prescribing the terms of sale of said bonds, authorizing the preparation and execution and delivery of one or more bond purchase contracts, a paying agent agreement, a fiscal agent agreement, an official statement, a continuing disclosure certificate, and an investment management agreement for said bonds, and authorizing the execution of necessary documents relating to said bonds, and conduct a first reading of resolution number 4809, declaring official intent of the Sweetwater Union High School District to reimburse certain expenditures from proceeds of indebtedness. Dr. Aguirre?
Thank you, President Solis. So with that, as we've heard and we've experienced recently, I think our schools are very much ready for us to make an investment in our facilities again. It's been a good while coming, but I think given the due diligence that's been happening across the district in an effort led by our finance department and our chief financial officer, Dr. Jenny Salkeld, we're in a place where we're pleasantly ready to move forward in this next step to really make those investments, much needed investments in our facilities. So that is the goal for the day of today in this workshop, is for Dr. Salkeld and the team that she has assembled to really go through the process so that we can touch upon the next steps. And so with that, I'll ask Dr. Salkeld to lead this presentation. Dr. Salkeld.
Thank you, Dr. Aguirre, and good afternoon, Board President Solis, Board Trustees, our cabinet that is here, and then also the public. We're very excited to be having this presentation and share this with you. I think it's, like Dr. Aguirre said, it's been a long time coming. We're going to highlight a couple of things of where we've been and then where we're going, right, and the great things that ahead of us to help build projects at our schools. But I'd like to first start off, because the last few months, as part of that due diligence, we've been working very closely with our district staff that are here, but also closely with our partners, such as Mark Young with KNN Public Finance, who's here to my right, as well as Eugene Clark Herrera with ORIC, Bond Counsel. We do have on the caller on MS Teams and Rolene, who's our Bond Disclosure Counsel. And in the audience, we also have other members from the ORIC team. And we also have our underwriters. We have 4 firms that are part of this transaction. And we've been bringing this information to you over the course of the last few months to build to where we're at today. And so again, it's been a very much a collaborative effort as we've been brainstorming. You'll see a lot of the details. There's a lot of different nuances to financing a structure, such as with 2 measures, our Propo and our inaugural Measure DD, that we haven't been able to do anything over the last 4 years because we did have to place a pause, right? And so let me start off with this first slide here. And this happens to be a coincidence. It wasn't planned as such, but it was 4 years to this very week that we shared with the board the district's financial position. So we've come a long way. And so this particular slide really explains the why we had to put things on pause with the bond program specifically, and as how it ties to the financial position. As you're aware, the district, there were several negative certifications that followed after what was presented with that shortfall with 2017-18. And then the subsequent actions with the County Office of Education with oversight, and then most importantly, which triggered a lot of additional work too, is with the Securities and Exchange Commission. That really led why we needed to put some systems in place and address that piece before we went collectively to the financial market. Those scenarios at that point in time also resulted in various downgrades with the various agencies, such as with Moody's and with Fitch, and Standard & Poor's, which provide the underlying rating when you're going out to the market. So this has been where we've been, but now it's also helping us look ahead and how we've turned things and to help with our credit narrative so that we can make a case to the rating agencies to look at where we stand today and to improve those ratings. So that'll help the district as well as the taxpayers as we look at the rates that when we go out to the financial market at the end of September. So it's just a key perspective because it is an area that we've been highlighting with the rating agencies over the last 4 years, where we've been and then where we're going. So it's a key point of reference. The next slide highlights those improvements. So over the course of the last few years with new management and with the collaboration with the board and with several other parties as well, working on that multi-year stabilization plan. So you can see here on this slide those particular successes. We're able to say at this point that those things are closed, completed, such as the FICMAT reports, the SEC work. And then we've put a lot of improved controls in place, as we've been sharing with you, with our interim reportings as well as our budget, and how we brought forward last year a positive certification. So that is very much a significant piece to show that the district's positioning itself going forward. And with those ratings, we've had positive outlooks, not necessarily the underlying rating. We've had just the positive outlooks. And just some other items such as paying down QZAP, paying down debt that we have. That's the debt we had against the general fund. We paid that this past year, as well as also paying in advance the early retirement program that we had on the CERP that went into effect in 2018. All of these items are going to be a key piece to telling that story to the rating agency, and it really demonstrates the fiscal stewardship that we've all collectively done together over the last few years. And also the reserves, right? We've tremendously changed the status of our reserves. Again, back in 2018, it was a negative number. Now we've got reserves, and we're very deliberate on how those funds are going to be used. One item we'll touch upon here later, too, will tie into the bond issuance as well, that part of that set aside. Again, these are all the positives, again, of what we're doing going forward. What we'll do in the next few slides as an opportunity here when we bring these types of issuances forward to the board is there are different elements aside from the financial piece that we highlight, the overall debt portfolio of the district. What are the variables that go into building that financial model for each one of our issuances? And so what you see here on this particular slide is where the district stands today with the different issuances. And you can see in that top section, we have Measure BB, which is a previous one, but you can see there's no authorization. However, we do have in the next table below, there is still outstanding debt. So it's part of our debt portfolio because it hasn't been paid off in full through the assessed values. And then there's our Proposition O. So that was an authorization of $644 million by the voters, and we still have $339 million. And then with Measure DD, that was our inaugural one passed by the voters in 2018 of $403 million. We're going to be issuing about half of that with this particular issuance. And we'll have Mark Young explain how that also works in a little bit because there are parameters you can't go out to the market with the full authorization, so he'll highlight that piece as well. But it shows what we have authorized as a district to pursue to bring in dollars so that the facilities team can improve our campuses or build new structures and so forth. So this is a snapshot of where we're at today. As we go to the next slide, assessed values are very critical, and we go through a process with the County of San Diego and the Treasurer's Office or the tax collector. Usually around May, they provide school districts and entities with preliminary numbers. That baseline of where the district is with that assessed value is what rolls into determining what can we go out to market, what available funds we have through those property taxes that we can pursue the work ahead. And it's always key kind of looking at and kind of a unique consideration for a school district such as Sweetwater. We do have an annual tax rate of $27 per $100,000 of AV. So we're very different versus a unified school district because of that particular parameter too. So that's another factor. When we build out these models, we do take a conservative approach. It's about 3% is what we have assumed going forward, but you can look historically to the table to the right where we've been over the last few years, kind of reflective of where the real estate market has been. But where we're at with 22, 23, we're about a $60 billion assessed value base. And we'll touch upon some of those dynamics there. But you can see over a course of time, you know, when the Great Recession hit, there were scenarios where it was negative assessed values. And so that plays into a part. But going forward, based on trends, we have a 3% built in. And the next slide just takes those data points and just puts it in graphical form, so you can kind of see how that is year over year. And another consideration is regarding compliance with AB 182. That's why we are bringing forward to you a first read. This ties specifically with Proposition O. This is a result of what transpired many years ago, as many of us know, kind of with Poway Unified. And there was work with Dan McAllister at the time when he introduced this AB 182 to the state legislature, and then the governor signed, putting into effect specific criteria when bonds are issued with capital appreciation bonds, which are those longer maturity. And again, Mark Young will highlight that when you see that particular model with Propo, why we still have to go out to market with a CAB, what's known as a CAB. But these are the criteria. So we're sharing here with the board and the public that all of these terms are met with what we were building into, the one for Prop O that we're looking to go out to market with, that we're within the 25-year term, that we have an interest rate that's less than 8%. Again, all these little different callable features, that the ratio of debt is no more than 4-to-1. So these are all key items. That's why we're sharing it with the board. It's kind of a checklist for all of us just to make sure, are we passing that test? And that's why we have that here for you. But that is a key consideration with Proposition O. The other part that we share, again, for sake of transparency as well, is with both measures you see here, there are costs of issuance. In order for us to secure these funds and go out to market and work with a lot of different experts or consultants in this field, you can see here the breakdown. These are our current estimates from the underwriters, even to the rating agencies. There are fees associated with them issuing those ratings, and their follow-up work that they do periodically throughout the years while that debt is outstanding. So you can see across the board the various players that are involved and the fees associated. So we have this noted here for you by issuance and what we anticipate would be the total cost. And these will come from the proceeds of the issuance. And then with that, I'd like to transition at this point to Ms. Janaea Quirk to provide background on each of the issuances or the projects planned, and then Mark Young will follow with specific financing details.
Good afternoon, thank you. So on this slide right here, it's focused on Proposition O. We have outlined funds set aside of 5% for program management, and we're holding a 10% on project program contingency. At this time, we've earmarked the following projects: Castle Park High School for building and site improvements for $10 million. When we get to the future slide, you'll see another offset balance for that same project as well. And then finally be able to bring Granger Junior High, which has been a long-running conversation for many of us at this table for quite some time. We are allocating just under $21 million to go towards Granger for student support services, classroom-focused projects. And then lastly, the same for Mar Vista Academy at just under $13 million. And then we have set aside, as we traditionally do, funds for roof and HVAC, more deferred maintenance in nature projects with these funds that we have allocated out of Propo. And let me see my notes really fast. Just really quick, we would be moving into design, would take us about 12 to 15 months for the programming, DSA, et cetera, for these projects. And then we'd have about a year of construction once we put them under. So we're still the better part of 2.5 years out from seeing completed projects at this time with the projects we have identified. Okay.
Great, good afternoon. On this slide, we're depicting the sources and uses and the bond structure for the Series 2022D for Propo. As Janaea said, we've highlighted a little over $56 million of project funds to meet the projects that she listed earlier. The estimated amount of bonds that we'll be issuing is about $56.8 million. I believe in the resolution, we have a slightly higher amount in terms of an authorization amount. And we'll determine when we're actually in the bond market based on prevailing interest rates exactly how much we can raise. But for purposes of the workshop and your approvals, we provide best guess estimates as it relates to the amount of bonds that are sold. As mentioned before, the structure will be $56.8 million of principal. That'll be principal charged against your voter-approved authorization. By virtue of the way the bonds are structured, we sell the bonds with interest rates, coupons, that are actually higher than the underlying yield of each of the maturities, and I'll show that to you in a second. What that means is bond buyers will pay a premium for a bond that has an above-market interest rate relative to its yield. The premium that gets generated, given the Attorney General's recent opinion, all of that has to go into, in essence, a debt service account. So we've estimated approximately $1.4 million of premium, and every dollar of that will go into what we call a capitalized interest fund, but basically a set aside for debt service. As long as that Attorney General opinion is out there, and if we don't have a legislative solution in the future, going forward, cost of issuance and underwriter's discount will be charged out of your proceeds. So it will come out of that voter-approved authorization. I will comment that there's a lot of school districts that are not happy with the Attorney General's opinion, and I suspect your neighbor to the north, San Diego Unified, will probably be taking a leadership position in pursuing legislation to try to get that clarified. So going forward, we can use premium. But sitting here today, unfortunately, we have to deal with the Attorney General's opinion. The bonds will be structured with a combination of current interest bonds. That means bonds where we pay interest currently on a semi-annual basis, kind of like your mortgage. And also, we will have capital appreciation bonds. And when I show you the modeling in terms of your assessed valuation, your outstanding debt service, and the revenues available to pay debt service, it'll become very apparent why we have to use capital appreciation bonds where the interest isn't current, but it accrues to the maturity. There'll be a small taxable note that will be included, and that's a technical issue as it relates to the overall tax exemption of the bonds. The bulk of them will be tax exempt. Because the bulk of the financing will be capital appreciation bonds, it will have a final maturity of 25 years to be compliant with AB 182. We will have a 10-year prepayment option, again, to be compliant with AB 182. As Jenny said, we're assuming a 3% annual growth in AV for our assumptions, which is relatively conservative. And we're using the max tax rate that was told to the voters for that authorization of $27. Any questions on sort of the summary? Then moving forward, a lot of things on this next slide on page 10, a lot of numbers. But basically, this lays out the overall debt service for the issuance of bonds. So you'll see on the far left, we lay out the maturities, the payment dates of the bonds. And you can see that they go out to August 1 of 2047. So that's a little bit less than 25 years because we'll be selling the bonds in September. So we're AB 182 compliant. We highlight the bonds that will be callable on 8/1/2032. So those bonds can be prepaid at any time after that point at par. The current interest bonds are structured between 2023 and 2031. That's where we have revenue to be able to support paying current debt service on those bonds. The balance of the bonds will be capital appreciation bonds. You can see there's no interest paid on those in the first 10 years, but interest is paid at maturity. And then one key aspect, if you remember in the AB 182 restrictions, we have a repayment ratio that cannot exceed 4.0. So what we've highlighted here is our total debt service will be, on the cabs, will be $115.2 million. The principal that we raise is approximately 44.4, so our repayment ratio is 2.6, well below that maximum 4.0 for the AB 182 restrictions. The next slide, this is a very simplistic slide relating to the modeling of how we structure our debt service and what we can afford. It actually is an 11 by 17 spreadsheet with a lot of different components. We work very closely with the County of San Diego to make sure we match in terms of the assessed valuation. They make a number of adjustments to reflect how they actually determine the tax rates. So we work very closely with them to make sure we mirror the same approach. So the total AV adjusted for 3% growth, that takes into account all of the adjustments that the county makes. And then we apply the 3% growth factor to it. We then take the $27 maximum tax rate that was the promise to the voters to determine how much revenue will we raise. Next to that, we look at the outstanding debt service. So as Jenny mentioned earlier, we've issued a little over half of the Prop O authorization. So we have that existing debt service that we have to take into account before we can then see what do we have available for our new issue. And you'll see that what we've done is we've attempted to structure our debt service such that we use every dollar available of that additional revenue to pay debt service on our 2022 bonds. So I know during sort of briefings, some questions have been asked about, well, can we do more? Or why can't we do our entire authorization? And this table is the key to that. Right now, we have a finite amount of revenue based upon the modeling. We're going to issue against every dollar of it, and that defines for Prop O the maximum amount that we can issue in 2022. So we're doing as much as we possibly can, and as we look in the future, to the extent AV grows greater than the 3%, we'll get additional capacity, as well as every 2 years, we'll have an additional tail of the 26th and 27th year that we couldn't leverage because we have AB 182 restrictions. Those years will free up and will be available to support debt service in future issuances. But right now, where we're sitting, we're really maxing out Prop O at the $56 million. The next slide is just a graphical depiction to show your outstanding debt service and to show the debt service on where you're issuing your current interest bonds and your capital appreciation bonds. And, excuse me, and also it proves that we're meeting and not exceeding our $27 tax rate. So I'll stop there and ask if there are any questions.
Questions or comments from the board? Oh, Mr. Tarantino?
Yeah. What happens if there's another real estate crash like in 2008? How does that affect what we're talking about right now, or does it even do that?
Our requirement when we structure the sale, and we're presenting to you today, is to go through all the components that determine our ability to make debt service payments. The most critical component is the assessed valuation. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll know the actual amount of bonds that we'll be able to sell based upon prevailing interest rates when we sell. Once we sell, that debt service is on the books. There's nothing that we can do to change that, with the exception of possible refinancings in the future if interest rates move our way. If the assessed valuation doesn't meet our growth projections, the county assessor is going to determine whatever tax rate is necessary to pay those bonds, and they will levy that tax rate. With a Prop 39 election, you could have gone as high as $30 in terms of voter approval. You chose to keep it lower at 27. But irrespective of that Prop 39 restriction, if we had a couple years of negative growth and the assessor has to levy at 32, they're going to levy at 32 in order to make sure you can make your debt service payments.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tarantino. Mrs. Hall?
Thank you, President Solis, and I thank you, I can't read your name tag, but thank you for the explanation. I think as I understand it, because there was a real, red flag that went off when I saw cabs in this, and as I understand it and was explained by Dr. Salkeld and Dr. Aguirre was, we're kind of locked into the model because of the Propo structure, how it was structured originally when that went to the voters and how they issued those bonds originally. But what I was noticing in the documentation of the draft statement was the mention about sinking fund. Could you explain that a little bit and how it relates to what we're doing now?
Right, and it's more relevant to DD because the structure, if we go back to page 10, so we see the structure of the debt service. The capital, what we'll end up doing is we'll be selling specific maturities of bonds for the current interest bonds. So there'll actually be a August 1, 23 maturity. And that'll be its own maturity. There'll be $70,000 of bonds in that maturity at an interest rate of, let's say, 2%. The next year, there'll be a specific maturity for that 8/1/24 maturity, and it's going to have its own interest rate, maybe 2 3/4. So for the current interest bonds, we'll have 10 years of what we call serial maturities, specific maturities for each year. When we get out past 10 years, we'll continue doing that for our capital appreciation bonds. And that's just a function of the market for capital appreciation bonds requires them to have their own specific maturity. When we get to the discussion of DD, the entire debt service profile will be current interest bonds. We're going to be going out 30 years. When you get out to kind of past 20 years, the yield curve is relatively flat, meaning that the difference between a 20-year and a 30-year interest rate is negligible. So what bond buyers would like, they would rather have a larger size maturity for liquidity. And so they would prefer to have a 30-year bond and have that bond pay down in years 26, 27, 28, 29. But because it has a 30-year maturity, we don't call those payments in 26, 27, or 28 maturities. We call them sinking fund payments. So it's the ability to, in essence, pay down a portion of that 30-year term bond in year 26, 27, 28, and 29, as compared to having separate maturities, 20, 21, 22, 23. By combining them into a 25-year bond and a 30-year bond, it's a larger bond, more liquidity. You'll actually get a lower interest rate by structuring it that way.
Thank you.
Dr. Arancibia? Did you have a question?
Even if there is a down cycle with regards to the real estate market, eventually it plays out that it's going to be able to recover the cost, no, almost guaranteed, yes.
And that's why we also provided in the table sort of averages. So you could look at rolling averages that included 5 years of the Great Recession, compare that to the assumption we're using of 3%, and it validates that we're being conservative. And frankly, because of the 4-year delay and sort of the story behind the credit and the changes, the last thing we want to do when we go to the rating agencies or the market is to be overly aggressive on the overall program plan. We're trying to send a message to the rating agencies and the market that the district has moved past the past, and we're in a great position, and coming to you with a plan that's relatively conservative. It's meeting your program objectives to meet your capital facilities, but isn't relying on overly optimistic projections. That fits into the narrative that we're attempting to get from the rating agencies to get the credit rating upgraded and get you the best overall financing possible.
Thank you.
For the next section, I'll hand over back to Ms. Quirk to highlight the projects for Measure DD.
Thank you. And to pick up from where Mr. Young was, what he was just speaking to, from our lens, one of the things that we're doing is being really conservative in our project development in terms of cost forecasting. So we are building in construction contingencies, program contingencies, and then right now what we're seeing coming in on our estimates, and all of this is reflected in the values you see in front of you. Escalation is 13.3% to midpoint of construction right now. So we're optimistic that we'll see a little bit of softening, but we are continuing to have to battle with the continued inflation and the rising uncertainties within the construction industry. So we've used those approaches in terms of identifying the projects that we're bringing forward. With the DD, we have the same 5% and 10% for project management or program management and contingency set aside. And we're really looking at this from an equity lens in terms of our stadiums. As you're all aware, we're already in motion. We spent all of today, and they're actually wrapping the last meeting right now, meeting with all 4 of the school sites to get the design in motion with the school site teams and students in some situations as well. So that was exciting. The other thing that you'll see coming forward on the DD is the other half of the apportionment for Castle Park High School to take them to about $21 million in total for a new project behind the state and aside from the stadium project. And then lastly is the $8 million as what I would call is going to be a definite phase 1 towards district office consolidation efforts, because those costs will definitely long-term exceed the $8 million we have sitting in front of us. That's it. Thank you. Back to Mr. Young.
Me for a second. So on this one here, as, again, this is the evolution of when we meet together as a group, when we start to identify areas of opportunity. We've talked about a defeasance of a debt as it relates to this property here on L Street. And if you recall, and I mentioned earlier too, what we have is a set aside in the fund balance for general fund, which is about $20 million. That debt obligation here for the L Street property comes from our Fund 40. And that fund, the annual debt service is a little over $2 million, like $2.6 million. And Fund 40 will not be able to sustain it in a couple years. We probably have about 2-3 years left. If we were to assume that debt payment, it would then transfer back to the general fund. If you remember a couple years ago, because before the property was sold on 3rd Avenue, we had put that cost into our budget projections at the time. So this is an opportunity through this financing for us to pay off what they call defease that debt and minimize the risk to the general fund in a couple years. Again, it's a very good credit positive approach to sharing this with the financial market. But again, it's part of that evolution when we were looking at earmarking 20 million from the general fund. We thought at that point in time we might need monies from the sale of this proceed to pay off that difference. But as we're progressing with our work with fiscal year end, we're seeing that our fund balance is coming in a little bit more favorable, that we'll be able to cover that. Right now, we have about $28 million estimate, but depending market conditions at the time, it might come in a little bit lower than 27 million when we go to close the transaction. That 27 million would come from the general fund. And it would pay that debt, and it would tie to the work that we're doing here and what Janaea just highlighted in the Measure DD project to start that work here at the district office without that obligation. But I wanted to highlight that because it is what we've talked about as L Street defeasance and the work that's around. It's just, again, part of that work as we move forward. And it'll come from general fund. Now I'll hand over to Mr. Young.
Thank you, Jenny. So the next slide, we talk about the inaugural series of 2018, our 2022 A bonds. We're planning on issuing 200 million, of which approximately 198 million will go towards projects. The balance will go towards cost of issuance and underwriter's discount. Because these are current interest bonds and they're going out 30 years, we generate significantly more premium. That's just it's a mathematical function of the underlying yield and the coupons. So the bulk of that, in fact, 100% of that premium will go into a debt service account and be used to pay debt service. And again, a technical component, but there will be a small short-term taxable piece that we have to issue to keep the overall bond issue in compliance with tax-exempt rules. But the bulk of it will be tax-exempt, a 30-year term. These bonds also will be 10-year callable. We've assumed the 3% annual growth rate, and its maximum tax rate promised to the voters was $24.50. So the next slide, a little bit less complex because we don't have any capital appreciation bonds. So here what we've done is we've laid out the principal components in terms of how we'll issue the bonds. Right now, we're estimating probably 15 years of serial maturities, so from 23 out to 38. And then we'll probably have a 25-year term bond and a 30-year term bond. So right now we have, estimated payments starting in, say, 39 to 45. Those will be sinking fund payments for a 25-year term bond. And then from 47 to 52, those will be sinking fund payments for a 2052 term bond. The repayment ratio, again, we're not required to demonstrate it because we're current interest bonds, but your repayment will be $381,000 based on 200 million of principal. So you're going to be well below 2 times repayment ratio. The next slide should be relatively easy to follow. The same AV as we have for Propo, the same growth rate assumption. The difference being we have a 24.50 tax rate, and we have no outstanding debt service. So we have the ability to structure our debt service with no restrictions relative to outstanding debt service. So what we're planning on doing is we're going to issue short-term bonds in years 1 through 3. So we max the tax rate. So the voters will see an immediate $24.50 tax increase. We do that, it's called a barbell structure, where we front-load the debt service, so we get that tax rate. And the idea being is that that tax rate now will remain flat. As compared to, we could start with maybe $12, and then the next year bump it up to 18, and then bump it up to 24. And the idea is, once we start issuing bonds, we should hit that max tax rate, and then the voters and the constituents aren't going to see their tax bills going up over time. It's a one-time hit, and then they'll continue to sort of see it flat. The other beauty for doing that is, to the extent that you have, in your case, for this program, it's primarily long-term capital improvements. But to the extent that there was any sort of FF&E, or if there were sort of short-term technical whiteboards, computers, other things that have been financed with GO bonds, to the extent that you have shorter-term maturities, you can say, hey, we used short-term money to finance short-term projects. But again, given your current use of funds, there's really not a requirement to do that. So having short-term money to finance a 30-year project is completely appropriate as well. And then you'll see, if we looked at the same program modeling for O, we only had residual revenues of $1,000 or $2,000 after our 2022 sale. You can see here that we have significant revenues available after this sale of bonds, and that's because it's our inaugural sale. You've had 4 years of assessed valuation growth that you hadn't anticipated when you went to the voters in 2018. You thought you were going to start issuing bonds immediately. So you have that benefit of that assessed valuation growth as sort of, wind behind your sails. So to your point, while Prop O is very definitely challenged in terms of assessed valuation, and that's limiting our ability to access future issuance, we've got plenty of room under DD. So even with a year or two of negative growth, we can afford that and still be able to plan out the future issuances of that authorization. The next slide, we just, again, lay out graphically the line that represents the revenue that gets raised at our 2450, and then you can see the capacity that remains after we sell our 2022 A bonds. And then lastly, in terms of my presentation, page 19, we also have a restriction. It's a state law restriction that says that at any point in time, the district can't issue GO bonds if, because you're a high school district, you have a limitation of 1.25% of your assessed valuation to be outstanding at any point in time. So what we've done here is we've highlighted your existing debt service that's out there for your Measure B bonds and your Measure O, and we highlight the outstanding principal at each point in time. We aggregate it across each year, and then we add to it your Series D Propo issue and your Series ADD to show what your total outstanding balance is. So after we sell these bonds, after August 1 of 2022, you have $623 million and change of outstanding bonds. Your 1.25% limit is $759 million. That means, assuming you have the capacity to issue in terms of your tax rate and your assessed valuation, you could have issued another $136 million of bonds, and you would have been within your 1.25% AV limitation. There are other tax law restrictions that are driving how we come up with the amount of money that we raise primarily for DD. O is capacity restricted by virtue of your assessed valuation and your outstanding debt service. You have a clean slate with DD. However, to keep Eugene happy and to get that tax exempt opinion on the bonds, we, meaning the district, in particular Jenny, will be signing a certificate that says that the district has a reasonable expectation that we can spend all of our money, all 200 million, 85% of it within 3 years. So working with Jania in terms of the design elements, the state approvals, and then starting construction, we put together that project list that will allow us to comply with that 3-year reasonable expectation test. So when we sort of put all this together, we proved that we were AB 182 compliant with our Prop O cabs. We put together for Measure DD an all current interest rate bond scenario with plenty of capacity remaining. We're within our 1.25% cap in terms of state law issues. So every way that you sort of look at requirements and limitations, we're meeting internal requirements, we're meeting state law requirements, we're meeting federal law requirements. So with that, I'll stop there and again ask if there are any questions.
Okay, thank you. Questions or comments from the board? All right, doesn't look like it.
And then going to the next slide, so this is also an opportunity here for us, and it's part of the package that you have now, and then formal action on September 12th is a reimbursement resolution that provides under the IRS regulations, again, kind of parameters piggybacking on what Mark said. There are a lot of compliance and parameters we have to follow from federal, state, IRS, and other considerations, but this allows us an opportunity to memorialize because there are things that working with Janae, she needs to start some DSA work early on, right? So let's say with these athletic stadiums. She can start to do that work while we're working on a bond issuance, but utilize state school facility funds, which is what she brought forward to the board. So there'll be some out-of-pocket dollars out of state school facilities. But with this resolution, and we can bring that forward to the board, that now gives us authorization after the issuance to say if we spent $200,000 out of state school facilities, we can take those expenditures and apply them over to this project under the Measure DD or Propo, whichever it might be. So it's kind of an agreement that allows us to move those costs, and it's codified under this resolution, and it's within the parameters allowed under the IRS. It's kind of that look back, like, and you're just upfronting these monies to start projects a little bit earlier. So we'll have this in place for these bond issuances as we move forward for that purpose. Okay. And then the last schedule here is kind of what we have ahead of us. I mean, we've been doing a lot of work to then bring this forward here to the board today. We do have meetings with our rating we have rating presentations on Wednesday and Thursday. Working very closely with each of those analysts with Moody's and Fitch, sharing our information. We have a very thorough kind of slide deck book that we're going to be going with them, spending a couple of hours and actually taking a tour of one of our campuses as well, and making our case to improve those ratings. We anticipate having those ratings as noted here by Friday, September 9th. They'll give us a draft report. So that way we can present to you by September 12th, hopefully at that board meeting, the outcome of what those ratings are at that point in time. You'll have another update of the preliminary official statement that you have in your packet today. There'll be another update at that meeting. It will not note the rating because, again, the timing of when we have to publish that, but we anticipate having that by the 12th. That's our ask of the rating analyst this week. With that, and upon the board action on the 12th, the very next day, we'll work very closely with this team here, Bond Counsel, Disclosure Counsel, and with KNN to release, and the underwriters to release the POS, that very extensive document you have, to the financial market. That is the document that details the district's work and all of the financial components and how the project funds will be spent, to be released to the financial market to where we can start working with the underwriters to solicit interest from investors. That course of 2 weeks timeframe then will prepare us for the pricing in New York at the end of September. And as Mark mentioned, that's when we'll start to go maturity by maturity, kind of see where we're subscribed in terms of the interest and where we can kind of hopefully get some good rates with some of those particular maturities. So we'll do that work at the end of September and then officially close the transaction in mid-October. And that's at the time that the proceeds will be deposited into the account with the County of San Diego. We'll also be working very closely with the County of San Diego Treasurer over the course of the next few weeks into September and October. They'll be on a lot of our financing calls because it's an influx or inflow, and a significant inflow of monies coming into the county pool of over $207 million. So they'll be wanting to work with us and again, timing of projects so that they can manage the cash outgoes there as well. So there's quite a bit ahead of us here over the next month or two, but we're very excited with the work ahead.
Thank you. Dr. Aguirre?
Thank you, President Solis. I do want to make a couple of comments from a context perspective. So first of all, I think we can all agree there's a huge amount of need across the district, and this is, in essence, our ability to finally get back to the markets after having been absent from the markets for a long time. It's really important to highlight that the last time we did a study of our facilities back in, I want to say 2015, there was over $1 billion worth of need across the district. So from a contextual perspective, while this is great, it doesn't negate the reality that we have a huge amount of need across our district. So I think it's important to note that because we're trying to move forward in a way that's strategic, in a way that's measured, and in a way that makes sense for our district at this time. But there's a huge amount of need across the district. So this in no means is going to address the entirety of our needs. As we heard earlier, there's reasons why this is structured as such in order to meet all the layers of requirements that we must meet. But the context being Prop DD is a measure that authorized, $403 million. If we do an issuance for $200 million, that's in essence half of that issuance, that authorization. So I think our communities, as we've heard, regardless of which community it is, there is a huge amount of need and there's a huge amount of demand for improvement across our district. And we're seeking a path forward, understanding that it's not going to be the end-all be-all, it's not going to be a perfect solution, but it's a way for us to begin to make progress on the huge amount of need across the district. And so that is, I think, context number one. Context number two is $1 today is worth a lot less than $1 a year ago. And therefore, as best plans as have been made for the projects, inevitably we're going to be able to do less with the $1 today, simply because inflation has taken such a huge hit into the economy and it's going to hugely impact our construction program. Having said all that, I think this is a step forward and allows us to make some progress on that need. But I really wanted to highlight that. If you go to any of our campuses, we can all identify those needs. It's important that we as a district take a strategic approach. So there's some campuses that have access to other capital for projects, and that's why we try to be strategic with what's in front of us so that we can truly maximize to the degree that we can. I think another area that another variable that we try to really keep in mind is equity, because our district has for a long time had some inequitable facility solutions, and that's another lens that we try to keep in mind as well, is looking at where have the historic investments gone and where have they not gone. So it was a multi-layered analysis that went into this recommendation. There's no action for today. I really appreciate Dr. Sokol and the team bringing this forward for transparency, so the community has the ability to review what's being presented and then can return at the next board meeting on September the 12th. But I think it's really important from having the community have the ability to see how this is being structured. It's fully transparent regarding capital appreciation bonds, current interest bonds, the overall structure. I think that it's really important for us to have that transparency piece, because we're very mindful that this will be our initial bond offering from Prop DD. It's our initial bond offering after all the financial challenges we've had in our past. And so it's really important to make sure that we get this right. And so to that end, I really appreciate the team putting this effort together. But it's also important to highlight that there still continues to be a huge amount of need in our district. This is not going to resolve all the needs that are out there, but it's a way to make progress. So I just wanted to state that from a context perspective, again, understanding the huge amount of need, but again, this is our ability to access capital to be able to improve our facilities. I just wanted to note that, because I'm sure if you go to any one of our campuses, every campus is going to identify needs that are on their campuses, and it's valid. But we have to make decisions based on the approach that we have and on the limits that we have. So I really think this is a very prudent package that's being put together, and I believe it's a solid recommendation when it comes forward for the board. So I just wanted to share those thoughts and appreciate the team and all the work that went into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Aguirre. Just send it around one more time to the board. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Segura?
Thank you, President Solis. So with all you said there, Superintendent, you said a lot, and it was needed to be said, but you closed with prudent, and I think that's very, very important, and we all realize that, and it's super important. I'm glad to hear that, and explaining the need, and as you know, we've had one-on-ones almost with community members about their sites, and you've gone to other sites which I haven't been involved in, but there's a lot of need out there, and like you said, this is not going to solve all that, but we know that, but this will help with our initial steps, and glad we have a solid plan and put together by the professionals that are here, and thanks to, I remember our first meeting 4 years ago myself. I'll never forget that meeting my whole life. I don't want to relive it. But I appreciate all the work you've done since then, and the team led through Dr. Getty and your team to get us where we're at today. And it's been a lot of work. That your group is tired, and I know they are. And but they with all the audits and all the extra audits and everything. I don't want to talk about it anymore. But so now we have some really good work, right? This is good work. So it's going to improve lives, and it's super important. And I want to thank Dr. Gary and the team and for all that work, and the ladies and gentlemen are here to support this. I like the report. It was very easy to understand, and I truly appreciate that. All the information. There was a lot of numbers, a lot of numbers, but it was expressed in a way that I think I could understand it. So that's all I wanted to say in regards to this. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to go ahead and speak.
Dr. Arancibia, go ahead.
I'm a bit concerned with the plan that we laid out in terms of the facilities that are being fixed up, because my area, Bonita Vista, and Hilltop's gone through the whole remodeling, and Bonita Vista was on cue for 2 of the school sites, both the middle school, before we began the process. And I conceded the Bonita Vista Middle and the site, and now Bonita Vista High School is removed for it. So I would like to continue the discussion with regards to that. I do want to throw so much credit to everyone here that's coming to get us out of the hole and to be able to issue the bonds. And I want to thank you for all your work. But that's a real concern for me. And I understand that the inflation went up, but at the same time, too, Bonita Vista just has one project over the last 50 years that's been renewed, and that's the track and field. There's no theater there, even though it houses some of the most successful theater programs and music programs in there. So I'm just concerned about that, and I just would, I would hope that we can continue to have this conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Arancibia. And go ahead, Vice President Hall.
Thank you. I really appreciate all the work. And I know it's been, more than 8 years that I've been aware of the needs of the facilities, and way more than that because my kids attended school. And I agree with Dr. Arancibia. There's still needs in his school of Bonita High and Bonita Middle. Definitely have needs, just like many of our western side schools do. Most all of our western side schools do. And the thing about it is that I recall when we were first when I was serving on the Facilities and Oversight Committee, I asked for a report where they had the layout of each campus, and I asked for them to color those rooms with which rooms had been touched with which bond service. And as I recall, there was work done at Bonita Vista High, all the classrooms along that L, like there's 4 wings of classrooms that had received work under that prop, and some of it was new construction. But there was still huge needs, like you said, the Performing Arts Center there, they're lucky to have one, but it's definitely in need of work. And the gym, I know people have complained about the gym. But just like what Dr. Gary stated and Dr. Sokeld and what our financial experts have relayed, there's only so much we can do with our money at this point. And some of the other projects, and once we pay off the bonds that are the financing for the L Street, once we free that up, there's also other project money in other funds, right, that have to do with facilities and facility modernization and rehabilitation that I expect we can use to target those needs, like Dr. Arancibia laid out. But I'm very excited. I wish we had magic wands. I wish we weren't living in a world where we have to fight for every dollar for a school district to provide to the students what they need to keep the safety of our staff and students and be there as a resource for our communities. But I think this is a good way to do it, and I really want to know that because of all the eyes on the financial pieces, I feel that the work's been done to put us on the right path. So I appreciate everyone's work. I appreciate the facilities workers, everything they do, and our staff. And Dr. Sokeld, your team has been, I think they have done a tremendous amount of work and continue to do that. That's what financial teams do at school districts across our state, because they have to. It's a constant work. So I really appreciate everything. And I'm very glad that we had the time and we got all this material to really help us wrap our heads around it. But without the confidence I feel in our district leadership and in the financial experts, I wouldn't be able to sit here and say I have that confidence. But I do, because of everything that you've done to this state. Thank you very much. That's all.
Thank you, Vice President Hall. All right, I too wanted to say thank you to the team, Dr. Sokeld and the rest of the team for all the work. Very good. It's a step in the right direction, and like Vice President Hall said, I wish we had more money and magic wand to do everything at once, but we can't, and the numbers say we can only do so much. So I appreciate all the numbers, all the explanations, and all the hard work that's been put into this. So thank you. And with that, this special board meeting is now adjourned. We have 20 minutes. And I'll call the meeting of the Sweetwater Union High School District Public Financing Authority Board of Directors to order. Clerk of the Board, please call roll.
Arencibia?
Present.
Hall?
Present.
Segura? Solis?
Present.
Tarantino?
Here.
Aguirre?
Here.
This is the point on the agenda where members of the public may address the Board of Directors on the item before the Sweetwater Union High School District Public Financing Authority. Any public comment shall be limited to 3 minutes each.
There are no speakers, Mr. President.
So we have no speakers. We'll move on to C1, adopt resolution number 4800 of the Board of Directors of the Sweetwater Union High School District Public Financing Authority, establishing the regular meeting schedule for the Board of Directors and calling the next regular meeting. Dr. Aguirre?
Thank you, President Solis. As indicated, this item is an action item in terms of adoption, resolution number 4800. I will ask Dr. Salkel to guide us through this discussion. Dr. Salkel.
So again, good afternoon. This item here, because of what we shared at the previous meeting regarding the defeasance of the debt that is under this financing authority, we're bringing forward to you, this is a matter of setting the meetings scheduled. So that way, when we bring forward to you the escrow agreement and the resolution at the September 12th meeting, we've got this memorialized for that next meeting. So this is more of a procedural, putting the calendar of meetings together.
Perfect. Questions or comments from the board? Good? All right, so entertain a motion.
I'll make that motion.
All right, we have a motion
I'll second.
and a second.
Arencibia?
Yes.
Hall?
Yes.
Segura?
Yes.
Solis?
Yes,
Tarantino?
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
wonderful. That's it. So the meeting of the Board of Directors of the Sweetwater Union High School District Public Financing Authority is now adjourned. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.